a young doctor from Seoul, returned to the countryside to visit his grandfather. But when the patrol police passed by, they mistook him for a thief and restrained him. The young man took out his ID card, and the policewoman was stunned when she saw the familiar name. At this time, another police officer ran over and, without saying a word, grabbed the young man's arm and wrestled him to the ground. The young man immediately fainted. They took him to a nearby veterinary clinic. Fortunately, the young man was fine and quickly regained consciousness. This young man, Han Ji-yul, was the grandson of the owner of this veterinary clinic. Soon, his grandfather called to inform him that he and his grandmother were on a trip and had left the veterinary clinic for Ji-yul to look after. After giving him instructions, he immediately hung up the phone. Not giving him a chance to refuse, Officer An carefully examined Ji-yul's face, as if searching for traces of his childhood, her heart filled with anticipation. However, Ji-yul had long forgotten about her. A look of disappointment flashed across her eyes. "Nice to meet you. I apologize for my rudeness," she said, returning his wallet and inviting him into the car. They went together to a resident's house to deal with some urgent situations in the patrol car. Officer An asked Ji-yul if this was his first time here. "When was the last time you were here?" Officer An hoped he could recall the memories of the past and remember her, but she got distracted while driving, causing Sang Hyeon, who was nearby, to get hit and fall into the rice paddy. Officer An felt very sorry, but her words came out the opposite. "Why were you walking in the middle of the road like that?" "Well, I was distracted." "No, you suddenly appeared. I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry. These seem to be new clothes. What should we do?" "Oh my. Your butt is all wet. I'm sorry. Your hair is covered in mud too." "What to do? Why do you keep staring at me? Are you angry? Everyone makes mistakes." "I'm sorry. I'll help you wash them. I have to go find my uncle now, okay?" "I'm sorry." Officer An and Ji-yul arrived at the resident's house. The man had used a homemade trap to catch a stray dog that had been eating his chickens. He asked Officer An for help in dealing with it. Ji-yul, being a veterinarian, said they should treat the dog first, otherwise, it wouldn't be able to walk in the future. The homeowner strongly objected, saying that even after treatment, a stray dog is still a stray dog and would continue to come to his house and steal chickens. Officer An also felt that the dog should be handed over to the animal shelter, saying that as a police officer, it was her duty to ensure the safety of people's property. Ji-yul argued that if they sent the dog to the shelter, it would definitely die. He said he would take it back to the clinic for temporary care. With that, Ji-yul found a cage and locked the dog inside. After checking the dog's leg and confirming it wasn't broken, Ji-yul noticed Officer An was looking at him with resentment in her eyes. Just then, Officer An received a call. A goat from another family was in heat, and Ji-yul and Officer An needed to go there immediately to help. So, Officer An took Ji-yul through a shortcut. This road was a bit difficult for Ji-yul. "Oh my gosh, are you alright?" "Oh no. What should we do? This is bad." Covered in mud, Ji-yul arrived at the goat owner's house. Seeing the goat in heat, he was frightened and instinctively backed away. Officer An quietly placed her foot behind him, a smug look on her face, to show his manliness. Ji-yul could only bravely step forward and fight with the goat. Meanwhile, Officer An was cheering him on. "What are you doing? Hey, wait." Ji-yul returned home a mess. He couldn't believe what he had gone through that day. Before he could even catch his breath, the enthusiastic neighborhood ants, carrying big and small bags of kimchi, barged in. They didn't treat him like an outsider at all. Ji-yul really disliked this. "Wait a minute." Ji-yul told the ants that if they didn't knock on the door and just barged into someone else's house in Seoul, the police would arrest them for trespassing. After he finished speaking, the atmosphere immediately became silent. "There's a police officer here." "What kind of police officer?" After the ants left, Officer An told him that if he didn't want people barging in, he should remember to close the door properly. "I was just thinking the same thing." That evening, Ji-yul read the letter his grandfather had sent him. He said he was taking his grandmother on a cruise around the world because it was her dream. He asked Ji-yul to take over the veterinary clinic until they returned. Ji-yul went to the clinic to change the bandage for the stray dog, and then took a walk by himself to the stream. He came across Officer An swimming below, her eyes gazing as if she were looking at a green frog. Officer An saw him and smiled. Before she could say anything, the embarrassed Ji-yul quickly left. A city boy comes to the countryside to be a veterinarian. Can't even catch a goat. He slumped to the ground dejectedly, questioning his life choices. Ji-yul, drenched in sweat, returned home to see a little boy sneaking into his yard. Ji-yul stopped the boy, saying he had clearly locked the door, and asked how he got in. "You just reach inside and pull, and the lock opens." Ji-yul was incredibly annoyed, and immediately gave the boy a lecture. "You can't just enter someone's house without the owner's permission." The boy, who had never seen anyone so serious, felt wronged. Just then, Officer An happened to arrive. "So you're here, playing soccer in here again? Hurry up and go if you found it. Hold on a second." Knowing the boy wasn't doing this for the first time, Ji-yul stopped him again and lectured him like the neighborhood Ajumas. "Please forgive me, sir. Goodbye, good job." The boy walked out of the yard and couldn't help but complain. "My grandma once said that being able to speak annoyingly is also a talent, and it seems like he possesses that talent. Ji-Yul went to the clinic, only to find out that he had to go vaccinate a family's pigs that day. Seeing the schedule, Officer An also learned this news and paced back and forth restlessly at the office. She needed a reason to appear at the pig farm and see Ji-Yul. So, Officer An called the owner and told him that the director's grandson was coming to vaccinate the pigs this time. He's still young, so he probably doesn't need my help. But as soon as she finished speaking, she added, "But the number of pigs is quite large, and moreover, pigs are not as easy to inject as dogs. I'm worried he won't be able to handle it well." Even the chief couldn't understand what was going on with her. "You think she's going or not? Maybe I should go." "What? No, it's fine. It'll be faster if I help." Seeing so many pigs for the first time at the pig farm, Ji-Yul was stunned and didn't notice Officer An standing beside him. This being his first time vaccinating so many pigs, Ji-Yul clearly didn't know what to do. Officer An teased him. "Did you forget how to hold a syringe?" "I'm not the type to forget things." "Oh, is that so?" Ji-Yul didn't understand why Officer An was attacking him. Could it be that she was also deceived by someone like him before? To his surprise, she played along, saying that he was very much like someone who is forgetful, someone who forgets everything completely. After their banter, the two began catching pigs and vaccinating them. Afterward, they rode their bicycles along the country road, past the peach orchard filled with ripe fruit, and arrived at the cafe. Soon, Sang Hyan also arrived. He was the owner of both the cafe and the peach orchard. Sang Hyan mentioned that they had met before. "At that time, you were in the car, and I fell into the rice paddy, with coffee in hand." Ji-Yul returned to the clinic, and couldn't stop praising the coffee he just had. He asked the nurse about Sang Hyan. The nurse replied that Sang Hyan was a capable person with a good personality. "Speaking of impressions of others, I'm sure your impression on everyone is also quite good. You seem like a trustworthy person whom everyone relies on." Then he asked about Officer An. Why was she always appearing everywhere? At the mention of Officer An, the nurse's face lit up with interest. Officer An may seem like a police officer on the surface, but she's actually the mobile service center of this countryside. She said, "Wherever there's trouble, there's Officer An. She's such a warm-hearted and kind person." "So, she's a busybody housekeeper then? Are all Solites like you?" A phone call interrupted their conversation. "Get going quickly. There's a goat with a stomachache acting up." Ji-Yul quickly hopped on his bike and rushed off to the goat pen, swiftly turning on the goat catching switch. Meanwhile, Officer An was dealing with another difficult matter. A man wearing a baseball cap had stolen an old woman's grocery money. Moreover, this man was a repeat offender. Officer An suspected that it might be a high school student from nearby. A boy quickly provided Officer An with a crucial clue. He had just seen the thief sneaking into a house. Officer An decided to apprehend the thief. She arrived at Ji-Yul's house and quietly opened the door, only to be caught by Ji-Yul, who had just returned. "I can't believe it this time even you want to do it." Knowing that there was a thief in his house, Ji-Yul went inside with Officer An. She quickly subdued the thief who tried to flee, however. The thief was too strong. Pushing her aside and running away, Ji-Yul quickly gave chase, and both of them fell to the ground. Fortunately, police reinforcements arrived in time. Officer An and Ji-Yul worked together to restrain the thief. Seeing Ji-Yul sprawled on the ground, Officer An immediately reached out to help him up. "Wouldn't I be unteachable if I took your hand? You really don't know how to learn from your mistakes, do you?" Ji-Yul and An Ja-young were secret childhood friends. After more than 10 years, Ji-Yul returned from the city, completely forgetting about her, even when she asked him if he hated this place. Ji-Yul readily admitted that he did and that he had no fond memories here. "Wherever I am, I only want to live within my own boundaries, but here, there are too many people crossing those boundaries." That night, Officer An sought out Sang Hyan to vent. "It seems those cherished memories from the past were only ever fun for me," she lamented. "I treated them like treasure, but to him, they're probably just a joke." Sang Hyan listened patiently, and then said to Officer An, "From the day we were born until now, I'll never forget anything that happened between us. So your memories are not funny at all. You're right, you were a weird kid." The next morning, Ji-Yul and Officer An crossed paths again. A young boy who witnessed their exchange turned to look at the dumbfounded Ji-Yul, wondering what he had done wrong. "Did you and the veterinarian fight?" the boy asked. Officer An told the boy that they weren't fighting. "I'm just trying my best to let the vet live peacefully on his own," she explained. "That's the only way he'll feel comfortable after all. He'll be leaving this unfamiliar place soon anyway." Ji-Yul rode his bike a long way to his next appointment, panting as he marveled at his grandfather's hard work over the years. Just then, he saw Officer An's patrol car approaching quickly. He checked to see if she had stopped, and as luck would have it, a patrolling officer spotted him. As Ji-Yul greeted the officer, his eyes darted back to Officer An's car. The officer told Ji-Yul that he had come with Officer An, but she had a task to attend to and had to leave first. After Ji-Yul finished examining the cattle and was about to leave, he spotted Officer An with some elderly women. One of the women asked Officer An if her mother, who had left all those years ago, had ever come back to visit her. On the surface, it seemed like a caring question, but it was actually like rubbing salt in her wounds. Officer An was hurt by this reminder of the past. However, the woman showed no signs of stopping. Noticing Ji Yul, she turned to him and said, "I don't know if you heard us talking, but don't get me wrong. It's not that her mother didn't come back because she couldn't amount to anything." Officer An turned away with an embarrassed expression and walked off. Ji Yul quickly followed, wanting to offer her a ride, but she refused. Watching Officer An walk away, Ji Yul felt a pang of sympathy as the distance between them grew. Their hearts seemed to grow closer. Back at the clinic, Ji Yul wanted to buy a car for his grandfather, so he wouldn't have to work so hard when he went out on calls. The nurse told him to ask Sang Hyan for help, as his grandfather often borrowed his car. Ji Yul also wanted to inquire more about Officer An, but he swallowed his words. When he arrived at Sang Hyan's cafe, he ran into Officer An again, who was there to help with the peach orchard, before they could even greet each other. A plump ant interrupted them. She assumed Yul was the helper Officer An had found and immediately told him to get to work. Every year at this time, it was insect breeding season. They had to bag the peaches to protect them from being infested, or else the entire year's harvest would be ruined. This task was a piece of cake for Officer An, who grew up in the countryside. Ji Yul, on the other hand, was clumsy and awkward. The stem of the peach is very short. Officer An instructed Ji Yul, "So when you put the bag on, you have to make sure the stem is tucked inside. Let me show you." The ants witnessed their interaction, and one of them expressed her hope that the two would end up together. However, another ant strongly objected, firmly believing that Sang Hyan and Officer An were destined to be. She reminded Sang Hyan to keep an eye on them. Ji Yul actually had another purpose for coming here. He wanted to buy a comfortable used car from Sang Hyan for his grandfather. 10 million won, Sang Hyan declared. "What? How much did you say?" Sang Hyan admitted that the high price was due to his jealousy over what had just transpired. Officer An seized the opportunity and suggested that she take Ji Yul to the next town over to buy a car. She and Ji Yul could pretend to be a couple, as there were special deals for couples starting a business. This immediately made Sang Hyan anxious. Actually, he backpedaled. "I can lower it to 4 million. The sooner you can make your rounds, the better it is for everyone in the village. Just give me your account number." Officer An pulled Sang Hyan aside and questioned him. "Are you worried that I'm falling for him? Is that why you're acting this way? What are you talking about? You're being childish. Back in school, you used to whine like a duck whenever we switched seats for a new semester. And now you're doing this? How immature." Officer An picked up the dog, wanting to show Ji Yul the new tricks it had learned. "Go on, run," she encouraged. The dog's leg had almost fully healed, and Officer An planned to keep it. She had a lot of experience, having owned a dog before. In fact, that dog had been a gift from Ji Yul when they were children. Having spent more time with Officer An, Ji Yul began to realize that she had multiple sides to her personality. She could connect with anyone, even animals. He saw a warmth in her that he had never noticed before. People in town constantly sought her help. "Don't you ever get tired?" Ji Yul asked. "I like being busy," Officer An replied. "I like feeling needed." Sang Hyan had once said the same thing about her, that she loved playing the hero. However, she thought he had no right to judge her because she found him to be even more of a show-off. Ji Yul commented that Officer An must be very happy with Sang Hyan, always caring for her and looking out for her. Officer An replied that she and Sang Hyan had been together since birth, and they would undoubtedly stay by each other's side until the very end. "Speak of the devil, and he shall appear." Sang Hyan showed up at that moment. "You're going shopping?" he asked. "To buy mating disruptors. Do you even know what those are?" Officer An teased. "They're drugs that use pheromones to prevent animals from mating, right?" Ji Yul replied. Well, you're quite knowledgeable," Sang Hyan remarked, then turned to Ji Yul and explained. "Peach borers are the worst pests in a peach orchard, so I use a stronger pheromone to prevent them from mating and laying eggs. From an insect's perspective, it must be maddening. Lately, I've begun to understand the frustration of wanting to mate but being constantly thwarted." He shot a pointed look at Ji Yul, his arrival clearly perceived as a threat, even as he walked away. Sang Hyan couldn't shake off his irritation and jealousy. The nurse noted a change in Ji Yul. He was different now than before. She suspected it must be because he'd met someone he liked. "Are you having relationship problems? You're wearing your heart on your sleeve." Right at that moment, Officer An rushed in, exclaiming that the dog had gone missing. They hopped on their bikes and split up to search the village. Ji Yul was the first to find the dog's trail, but no matter how much he chased after it, the dog refused to stop. Eventually, he was led deep into the forest. It wasn't until he caught sight of the dog that he realized it had become a father. As Ji Yul reached out to pet one of the puppies, the mother dog, misunderstanding his intentions, lunged at him. Not only did his contact lens pop out, but his hand was also left scratched and bleeding. They had no choice but to head back for first aid. Officer An helped Ji Yul down the mountain, one hand leading the dog, the other holding his. Just then, Ji Yul's phone rang. It was Aunt O. Her dairy cow was having trouble giving birth. Upon examining the cow, he found that the calf was stuck in the birth canal. He instructed Aunt O to find a long rope and together, he and Officer An pulled the calf out. Their exhausted expressions made it clear just how difficult the delivery had been. Thankfully, after much effort, the calf was born safely. Officer An praised Ji Yul, saying, "Not only are you handsome, but you're also a skilled midwife for cows." To thank them, Aunt Oh decided to host a celebratory dinner. She invited not only her neighbors but Sang Hyeon as well. Sang Hyeon's first act upon arrival was to separate Officer An and Ji Yul, seating them far apart. The look in his eyes, as if he wanted to stab Ji Yul with a knife, was impossible to miss. Aunt Oh brought out the grilled meat, urging Ji Yul to eat plenty. Ji Yul politely declined, saying he wasn't a big meat eater. Upon hearing this, Sang Hyeon immediately shoved a large piece into his own mouth and declared, "A real man eats and speaks with gusto." Aunt Oh then brought out her homemade medicinal liquor. Officer An told Ji Yul that not only was it delicious, but also very beneficial for men. To her surprise, Ji Yul said he couldn't drink alcohol. "He's right to think twice," Sang Hyeon interjected. "This stuff is stronger than it looks." "Then I'll just have one glass," Ji Yul conceded. "If you can't drink, then don't," Sang Hyeon insisted, his jealousy flaring again. Aunt Oh, oblivious to the tension, promptly filled both Sang Hyeon and Ji Yul's glasses. After their meal, Officer An and Ji Yul headed home together. Under the moonlight, it seemed inevitable that something would happen between them. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No, but your bike." Concerned, Officer An leaned over to check his bike, assuming it was the problem, but Ji Yul stopped her. He said that if she touched it, her hands would get dirty. He accidentally grabbed Officer An's hand, quickly let go, and said he would do it himself. Just then Sang Hyeon flashed the light toward them and questioned how far they'd gotten after all this time. He expressed discomfort about Officer An being with a man who had been drinking, suggesting men use alcohol as an excuse for inappropriate behavior. Feeling awkward, Ji Yul excused himself, leaving Officer An with her lady friend, Sang Hyeon. He intended to imply their platonic relationship, hoping for a peaceful sleep, however. Sang Hyeon's next words would keep him up all night. "An Ja Young, I feel the same. I want to hold you close. My thoughts are dark. I like you. So don't be too comfortable around me," Sang Hyeon confessed, fearing Officer An might never know his feelings otherwise. He worried their close friendship prevented her from seeing him any other way. His suppressed emotions had become unbearable. Officer An asked if he wasn't afraid of breaking their friendship. Sang Hyeon insisted their bond was beyond simple definitions. To him, she was a friend. A girl, sometimes a little or older sister. He'd be happy if she became his girlfriend. But if not, they'd remain friends, neighbors, family. Even rejection was a temporary setback. They couldn't avoid each other forever. Officer An thanked him, and he simply suggested they act normally. The next day, Ji Yul checked on the newborn calf, advising extra care for its delicate state. Back at the clinic, he learned Officer An had borrowed a cage and fixed his bike before heading up the mountain. He found her there and expressed concern for her safety. They returned to the clinic with the dogs, which Ji Yul deemed healthy and promised to care for. He then tended to her injuries. The next morning, Sang Hyeon and a crying boy arrived at the clinic. The boy's dog had eaten chocolate. Sang Hyeon begged Ji Yul to save the dog, while he took the boy to school. After inducing vomiting and confirming the dog was stable, Sang Hyeon called Ji Yul aside. Only then did Ji Yul learn about Officer An's accident. The boy, panicked by his foaming dog, had called her. Distraught by his cries, she rushed over on her faulty bike, forgetting it was broken. She'd used a part from his bike, which had fallen off the previous night. Sang Hyeon lamented her selflessness, admitting he'd been counting down the days until Ji Yul's return to Seoul. He hated seeing Ji Yul in the place Officer An loved, because Ji Yul's eventual departure meant he wouldn't be held accountable for the pain he might cause her. Ji Yul realized Sang Hyeon's dislike stemmed from his concern for Officer An. He went to the hospital, bringing her lunch, seeing her leg being treated while she cut herbs with her injured hand. He was furious. "Aren't you hurt enough? Who else can cut those but you? Are you a robot or superhuman? Rest. This is self-harm. Helping others shouldn't define your worth." He berated her for fixing his bike, creating a debt he hated owing. Furious, Ji Yul stormed out. The boy visited his dog and thanked Ji Yul for caring for it. Officer An returned to the station for duty, but the chief stopped her, insisting a colleague drive her home. Listening to the rain, she felt a sense of peace. The boy wondered if Officer An had upset Ji Yul, recalling seeing her greet him earlier with no response. He urged Ji Yul not to be upset with her, explaining that she was as kind as a grandmother to him, and wouldn't intentionally do anything wrong. Ji Yul confessed he was at fault for making Officer An angry while trying to apologize. The boy immediately dialed her number on his phone and handed it to Ji Yul, urging him to apologize. Before Ji Yul could speak, Officer An had a car accident. Seeing her unconscious, Ji Yul desperately tried to smash the car window, the scene triggering memories of his own family's accident. It was a rainy day. A man had pulled him from the wreckage. It was Officer An's father. Traumatized then, Ji Yul had been comforted by a kind girl, Officer An. He pulled Officer An from the wreckage and stayed by her side at the hospital, however. She woke up to Sang Hyeon, Vaguely remembering Ji-Yul's rescue, she asked about him. Sang Hyeon explained the situation. Thankfully, Officer An was unharmed, as Sang Hyeon helped her out of the hospital. Ji-Yul watched from his car, a wave of emotions washing over him. The next day, Officer An went to thank Ji-Yul, but it was the anniversary of his parents' death. Disappointed, she left. Fate, however, had other plans. They crossed paths on her way back, but a phone call pulled Ji-Yul away before they could speak. As Ji-Yul left, Sang Hyeon arrived. Bringing up his earlier confession, she requested more time to think. He then took her to a village meeting, hoping her presence as an officer would keep the peace between the two bickering villages. They were wrong. Officer An became the target of insults, with one woman cruelly referencing her lack of parents. After the chaotic meeting, Officer An sat alone, deeply hurt by the reminder of her loneliness. She declined Sang Hyeon's ride, needing to walk alone. Meanwhile, Ji-Yul visited an old man whose elderly cow, a loyal companion for 30 years, was unable to stand or eat. The old man requested euthanasia for his beloved animal, wanting a peaceful end for the creature that had served him all its life. He hoped they would all be reunited in the next life. After administering the injection, Ji-Yul sat with the grieving man, who shared memories of caring for a young Ji-Yul after his parents' death. He mentioned a kind girl who often played with him, revealing her to be Officer An. Only then did Ji-Yul realize who she was. He found her by the stream and apologized. Finally recognizing her, Officer An understood his forgetfulness, acknowledging the trauma of losing his parents at such a young age. But the truth was, those memories, though painful, held a special brightness for Ji-Yul. Ever since Ji-Yul found out about Officer An's identity that morning, he had been waiting by the door, timing his appearance to when Officer An would take the little boy to school. He wanted to create a chance encounter, but he waited a long time, and Officer An never showed up. When Ji-Yul arrived at the clinic, he learned that the boy was on summer vacation. The boy then brought a little girl to Ji-Yul, asking him to treat her rabbit. The little girl hoped that Ji-Yul could cure it. Ji-Yul checked and found that there was nothing seriously wrong with the rabbit. It was just that the two children seemed to be angry at each other. It turned out that the boy and the girl were good friends. The girl had given the boy a book as a gift, but he had completely forgotten about it. So the girl was so angry that she refused to talk to him anymore. Knowing this, Ji-Yul advised the boy to temporarily stop talking to the girl, letting her be alone to think things through. He said that the more the boy kept nagging and pleading, the worse things would get. The boy thought it made sense because every time he tried to talk, the girl would glare at him, so he decided to follow Ji-Yul's advice. Sure enough, using Ji-Yul's method, the girl not only stopped glaring at him, she wouldn't even glare at him anymore. Officer An told the boy that if he knew he was wrong, he should apologize immediately and keep apologizing until the girl forgave him. It was supposed to be simple, not complicated at all. However, it wasn't simple. With the advice of Officer An and Ji-Yul, things between the little boy and the girl didn't go well. The boy was sometimes cold, sometimes enthusiastic, making the girl feel like he was two different people, so she refused to play with him anymore. Ji-Yul then gave the boy another idea. He said that if that was the case, the boy should play it tough. He told the boy to tell the girl that he had sincerely apologized, but if she still wanted to stop being friends, he understood. He would be sad, but he would respect her decision. Since it was summer vacation, they wouldn't see each other anyway. According to Ji-Yul's experience, if the boy didn't see the girl, she would definitely worry. He also told the boy to be patient and not listen to Officer An's advice to apologize anymore. The boy felt that Ji-Yul had a girlfriend before. That's why he had experience, while Officer An, who had never had a boyfriend, must not have any experience in love, so he decided to listen to Ji-Yul this time. As for Officer An and Ji-Yul, although they knew each other's identities, their relationship was extremely awkward. The more they met, the colder they became. Sang Hyeon didn't understand why they were like this again. Officer An thought they would have a lot to talk about, but they had nothing to say and only felt more embarrassed. Sang Hyeon said he was going to Seoul to meet a client and asked if she needed anything. He would buy it for her, but Officer An said she wasn't a child, and Sang Hyeon wasn't going abroad. The little girl came to Ji-Yul and said the boy had sent her a lot of weird messages and then disappeared. Ji-Yul immediately ran to the police station to report the incident. The village loudspeaker was immediately mobilized to inform everyone of the news. Officer An blamed Ji-Yul for advising the boy like that. Ji-Yul felt that the boy had misunderstood his words, but he knew he had to take full responsibility for this. His intention was for the boy to keep his distance from the girl, not to run away. He also said that the boy only messed things up because he listened to Officer An's advice, as the girl wouldn't accept his apology. However, Officer An contradicted that in love, one shouldn't keep their distance and calculate everything so carefully. The two were in the middle of arguing when Officer An received a call from the chief, saying that the boy had taken the bus to town. The two immediately drove there. Sitting in the car, Ji-Yul thought about how he had suddenly left without saying goodbye years ago, and when he returned, he didn't recognize Officer An, while she had recognized him from their first encounter. Embarrassed, Ji-Yul still hadn't apologized to her. It made him feel like he hadn't handled things well. so he asked Officer An if a sincere apology would be enough. Officer An told Ji-Yul that his method might not be wrong. It was just not suitable for a 9-year-old child, because disappearing naturally would make people worry. Were you worried, Officer An? Of course I was worried. A child went missing. Soon, the two saw the boy at the bus stop. When he learned that the girl was no longer mad at him, the boy was overjoyed and got in the car with him to go home, and Ji-Yul finally had the courage to speak his mind. You are my only happy memory from that year. Forgive me because I forgot. While Ji-Yul was visiting a farm to check on the cows, he overheard two women gossiping about the fight between the two villages the other day. The head woman of the other village had been bad-mouthing Officer An, saying she was ill-mannered because she lacked parental guidance. Ji-Yul felt unhappy hearing that. Just then, the head woman hurried over to him, asking him to help her mother's dog. The dog was very dear to her, and it was seriously ill, however, because they lived in a remote area. No veterinarian was willing to come. Seeing her desperation, Ji-Yul quickly declined, saying he had other work to do. Officer An, who was beside him, said she knew a shortcut that could save a lot of time. Ji-Yul immediately pulled her aside and asked, "Aren't you angry with her? She said many mean things about you, and she's only being nice because she needs your help." Officer An pulled Ji-Yul toward the car, understanding his concern. He once said that dogs are innocent and deserve treatment even when they are sick. Now he was changing his principles because of her. It made her secretly happy. She told Ji-Yul that although the head woman was two-faced and said unpleasant things sometimes, she wasn't inherently bad. They arrived at the house, and Ji-Yul examined the dog. Fortunately, there was nothing serious, however, on their way back. Their car had a flat tire. The mechanic told them the repair would take some time, suggesting they go to the beach and have coffee while they waited. Officer An apologized to Ji-Yul for the inconvenience. It was her fault for not considering unexpected situations, causing him to waste his precious time. But Ji-Yul said that it was thanks to her that he could see the scenery of this place. In an unexpected location, with someone unexpected, it made him happy. They walked along the beach and ate local snacks. After this trip, their relationship grew closer, just as they were getting more comfortable with each other. A surprising situation arose. "Ipia, what are you doing here? I miss you." Seeing the scene before her, Officer An politely excused herself. She thought that the girl was really Ji-Yul's girlfriend and couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. Initially, Ji-Yul didn't know how Choi Min knew he was there until he returned to the clinic and met his colleague from Seoul. His colleague had uploaded a video of him on social media before coming to the village. He had no idea Choi Min was following his account. Choi Min's purpose for coming was clear. She wanted to get back together with him. Choi Min told Ji-Yul that his clinic was quaint and he had become more masculine, which made her heart flutter. Therefore, she would stay for a week to win him back. If unsuccessful, she would willingly return to Seoul, so he shouldn't bother trying to stop her. Confident, she believed she could recapture his heart within a week. She informed him that the village had arranged accommodation for her, and she would be staying at Officer An's house that night. The Ajumas, seeing Ji-Yul and Choi Min together, assumed she was his current girlfriend and teased him, offering him herbal liquor to boost his stamina. Ji-Yul wanted to explain, but Choi Min immediately interjected, saying she would gratefully accept and put to good use anything they gave her. The Ajumas were completely satisfied with her, showering her with compliments, leaving Ji-Yul with no chance to speak, his eyes filled with frustration. Officer An could only offer a polite smile, not knowing where to look. Fortunately, Sang Hyeon arrived, rescuing her from the awkward situation. Seeing them standing together, Choi Min assumed they were a couple. After everyone left, Sang Hyeon remarked to Ji-Yul that his girlfriend seemed to miss him very much, especially going out of her way to see him. Ji-Yul clarified that Choi Min wasn't his girlfriend, and he didn't have one. He then turned to Sang Hyeon and asked, "You don't have one either, right?" Ji-Yul's friend didn't seem to disapprove of Choi Min's actions. He mentioned that Choi Min had to go abroad for work before, forcing them to break up. He believed she wouldn't have done this without careful consideration. If he were Ji-Yul, he wouldn't hesitate at all, as Choi Min was beautiful, kind, and intelligent. However, at that moment, the person Ji-Yul cared about most was Officer An. Officer An told Sang Hyeon that she thought highly of Choi Min. "She's very proactive, brave, and beautiful." "Are you talking about yourself?" "What? Are you crazy?" As Officer An was about to discuss her decision with Sang Hyeon, the dog broke free from its leash and ran off. They chased after it and found Ji-Yul holding the dog back. "What are you doing here? She's not my girlfriend." "What? I said I don't have a girlfriend." But right after that, Choi Min told Officer An that she would win Ji-Yul back. They were college sweethearts. But she was the one who ruined their relationship. Now, she regretted losing him and hoped that Officer An would help and encourage her. At that moment, Officer An didn't know how to respond. Choi Min went to the veterinary clinic, where the little boy had been waiting for her. Although everyone in the village was saying that Choi Min was Ji-Yul's girlfriend, the boy refused to believe it. He noticed that Ji-Yul often stared at Officer An, and when Officer An encountered trouble, Ji-Yul would immediately come to her rescue. He concluded that Ji-Yul must have feelings for Officer An. Hearing this, Choi Min realized that winning Ji Yul back would be more challenging than she thought, but she had no intention of giving up. Learning that Ji Yul would be examining a newborn calf, she went with him. Officer An happened to see them working together, a pang of jealousy rising within her. Choi Min remarked that the scene reminded her of their college days. Back then, she and Ji Yul were always together, just like now. Just then the Ajumas called, asking Officer An to find them some helpers. Ji Yul immediately volunteered. While making peach wine, Officer An kept avoiding his gaze. To break the awkward silence, Choi Min started a conversation about Sang Hyun, asking if he was very popular. Officer An confirmed, revealing that all the girls in their class had a crush on him back in school. Including her, she considered him her first love. Choi Min then suggested that with Sang Hyun being both her first love and by her side for so long, he could potentially become her last. Ji Yul, unable to stay seated, interjected, arguing that a childhood crush couldn't possibly determine one's final love. He pointed out that since he and Officer An were also close as children, so he could be her last love too. His words instantly cast an air of embarrassment. Officer An hurriedly gave him a jar, instructing him to take it to the storage room. Only then did Choi Min realize that they knew each other from before. Noting the intimacy in Ji Yul's gaze when he looked at Officer An, while initially concerned that he might have feelings for her, she now assumed Officer An was just a close childhood friend. Later, the Ajumas called Choi Min into the kitchen to taste some food. Noticing Officer An's continuous attempts to avoid him, Ji Yul confronted her, mentioning that he had heard about Sang Hyun's confession. She didn't reply, simply suggesting that he should treat Choi Min better. They could support each other in their work, and meet frequently even after returning to Seoul. Plus, Choi Min was so accomplished. Ji Yul clarified that his relationship with Choi Min was in the past, holding no lingering feelings or regrets. He explained that his lack of directness was due to his understanding of her personality. Regardless of what he said, she would do as she pleased. He could only wait until she gave up on her own. He then asked if she intended to accept Sang Hyun's feelings, pointing out the difference between familiarity and romantic love. Officer An admitted that being with Sang Hyun did feel familiar, but with Ji Yul, her heart raced throughout the day. He stated that it was precisely what love felt like. As their conversation ventured into an ambiguous territory, the village woman's voice interrupted, forcing them to part ways reluctantly. Back at the police station, Officer An found corn left by the head woman of the other village, a gesture of gratitude for treating her mother's dog. Meanwhile, Choi Min told Ji Yul that her branch would be relocating back to Korea the following month, putting her in close proximity to his clinic. She expressed her hope for them to reunite. She didn't need an immediate answer. Confident that frequent interactions would rekindle his feelings, she attributed his current fondness for Officer An to their shared circumstances in an unfamiliar environment, assuming it would fade upon returning to their normal lives. Ji Yul was about to retort, but she suddenly kissed him just as Officer An walked in. Officer An ultimately rejected Sang Hyun's confession. She believed a prompt response was a sign of respect, yet she struggled to give him one. The more time passed, the harder it became to answer. He was always cheerful and understood her better than she understood herself, but she feared hurting him and ruining their friendship. She was scared of regretting her decision. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. Sang Hyun, amused, pointed out that it was usually the rejecter who cried, not the rejected. He assured her that while they couldn't be lovers, he wasn't going anywhere. Their bond ran deeper than romantic love. He would always stay by her side, despite feeling somewhat hurt. I told you, you mean much more to me than that. He then teased her, claiming she would regret it if he found someone else in the future. Early the next morning, Choi Min waited at the clinic's gate. Ji Yul told her that even if she stayed, they couldn't go back to how things were. He recognized that her feelings weren't love, but rather a longing for the good old days and regret for missed opportunities. He confessed that he had feelings for someone else, someone he wanted to be with. Choi Min acknowledged her own stubbornness, driven by the memory of his affection and their shared happiness. It seemed it was time for her to let go. Ji Yul rushed to the police station, only to find Officer An absent. The chief informed him that she might be at the peach orchard. He went there, but couldn't find her either, instead encountering Sang Hyun. Sang Hyun bombarded him with questions about his family, health, finances, and assets. Acting more like a concerned brother than a potential rival, Ji Yul pointed out the drastic change in his demeanor compared to the previous day. Deducing that Sang Hyun had received his answer from Officer An, Sang Hyun, handing him a pair of gloves while they waited for her, remarked that judging by Ji Yul's state, it wouldn't be long before he received his answer too. Ji Yul, taking down a bag of peaches, noticed how the once green fruits had ripened, reminding him of the busy time he had spent there with Officer An. As soon as she appeared, Ji Yul chased after her. While she tried to quickly excuse herself, he confessed his feelings, declaring, "I like you." Officer An dismissed his confession, attributing his emotions to childhood nostalgia and their frequent encounters. Ji Yul clarified that his feelings weren't for a 12-year-old, but for the 27-year-old, mature woman she had become. She retorted that he was still the 13-year-old boy who left after giving her a dog. implying she couldn't possibly reciprocate his feelings. Despite her dismissive words, her heart raced. On her way back, the nurse informed her that the director was worried about Ji-Yul and would be returning soon. The news of his impending departure unsettled her. Back home, she found Choi Min waiting. Choi Min announced her departure, admitting defeat. She had initially believed that Ji-Yul was simply trying to replace her with Officer An, but it was clearly not the case. It made her feel sorry for misjudging the situation. Her words unburdened Officer An, prompting her to confess her own feelings for Ji-Yul. Choi Min revealed that she had sensed it from their first encounter and requested that they never see each other again, as she intended to erase this unrequited love. Watching Choi Min leave, Officer An couldn't suppress her emotions any longer. She rushed to the clinic. Demanding to know how much longer Ji-Yul would stay, he answered, "About half a month." Knowing that time was running out, he confessed his feelings. Acknowledging that his confession might seem rushed and unfair, however, before he could finish, she silenced him with a kiss, leaving him speechless. To avoid being seen by the villagers, Ji-Yul drove Officer An to Seoul for a date. They shared a simple pastry by the roadside, their hearts full, before making the 4-hour drive back, feeling no trace of fatigue. Back in the village, Officer An's demeanor at work was noticeably different, confusing her two colleagues. When someone called for assistance, the usually helpful officer claimed she couldn't make it as her shift was about to end. Moments later, Ji-Yul strode into the police station with an excuse about delivering dog food, whisking her away to head back first and open the door. In fact, they shared a stolen moment of intimacy in his car. Hidden from prying eyes, their secret rendezvous was interrupted by a knock on the window. It was the little boy, his timely arrival saving them from an embarrassing situation. He had good news to share. The little girl had agreed to be his girlfriend. He made them promise not to tell any adults, fearing unwanted complications, and offered them candy as a gesture that amused Officer An. Even a 9-year-old seemed to understand the inherent risks of public displays of affection. It made her wonder how they would ever face the Ajumas if their own relationship came to light. That afternoon, the head woman of the other village came by, seeking Officer An's assistance once again. But then she remarked that Officer An must crave validation, always eager to help. Her words ignited a fiery defense from the three Ajumas, who fiercely argued on her behalf. To their surprise, Officer An intervened. She admitted that she used to enjoy being needed but felt differently this time. She confessed to her past anxieties about being disliked for her perceived incompetence, but now, she realized it didn't matter as much. She would help the head woman, not to earn her approval, but out of respect for her seniority. With that, she cheerfully went about her duty. After work, Ji-Yul waited by the orchard road, ready to whisk Officer An away for dinner. They drove to a restaurant, but to avoid drawing attention, entered separately. Pretending to have bumped into each other, after their meal, they decided to pay Sang Hyan a visit at the orchard, offering him company in his singlehood. On their way back, Officer An took out the candies given to them by the children. Sharing them, they reminisced about the familiar taste from their childhood. Ji-Yul gazed at her intently, then leaned in for a kiss. Sometimes later, Ji-Yul planned a movie date, opting for a morning show to avoid familiar faces. Just then, he received an urgent call about a cow needing immediate attention due to premature water breaking. They rescheduled the date to afternoon. However, their plans were foiled again when an elderly woman with dementia wandered off, forcing them to push their date to the evening. By the time Officer An found the woman and returned her home, it was late. Her captain insisted on celebrating with dinner, an offer she couldn't refuse. She barely touched her food, eager to leave, but encountered a group of drunk men causing trouble. Frustrated with their repeatedly postponed date, she ended up drinking an entire bottle of soju. Meanwhile, Ji-Yul waited at the cinema, only to be found by the Ajumas. He had anticipated such encounters and calmly explained that he was just taking a walk. Officer An arrived, ignoring everyone, and marched straight to the loudspeaker. She announced to the entire village, now wide awake by the loud of the sound, that she was dating Ji-Yul. The Ajumas chuckled, informing her that their relationship was old news. Realizing everyone already knew, a slightly embarrassed Officer An simply said, "We should have gone public sooner." With Ji-Yul's return to Seoul just days away, they knew their time together was limited. Not wanting to waste a single moment, Officer An came up with a playful idea. She used flower pigments to mark his finger, a colorful declaration of his taken status to ward off any potential suitors. Back in the city, they were both hesitant to call, afraid of interrupting each other's lives. But during one video chat, Officer An noticed a bandage on his arm that she didn't know. She scolded him for not telling her, upset that he'd made her the kind of girlfriend who didn't even know her own boyfriend was hurt. Worried about him being alone in Seoul, she angrily ended the call. Ji-Yul's friend advised him that too much caution could stifle their love. Being in love meant occasionally worrying and being worried about. Sang Hyan echoed these words to Officer An, suggesting that if she was truly concerned, she should go to him. So she borrowed Sang Hyan's car and drove to Seoul, while Ji-Yul, hearing she was on her way, raced back to the countryside. Upon realizing they were both headed in opposite directions, He told her to stay put and sped back to the city. Their reunion was filled with heartfelt apologies and loving reassurances. Days later, Sang Hyeon mentioned to Officer An that he had scheduled her dog's vaccination. He assumed the head veterinarian would see her, but when she arrived at the clinic, it was Ji Yul who greeted her. He confessed that he had returned for good, inspired by her to take over his grandfather's practice. Noticing that the mark on his finger had faded, he pulled out a ring and proposed. "Let's mark all 10 fingers this time," he said, "a permanent reminder that you're mine. What do you say?" Thank you for spending your precious time to watch, and don't forget to give us a like and subscribe for more interesting recaps in the future.